In the late 18th century, the island of Saint-Domingue, today's Haiti, was the jewel of France's empire. Its sugar fields produced immense wealth, but that wealth was built on the backs of enslaved Africans. Brutality was daily life, and freedom was a dream many believed impossible. But in 1791, that dream erupted into fire. The Haitian Revolution, the only successful slave uprising in world history, began to turn chains into weapons and despair into defiance. Among its many heroes was a woman whose courage defied both empire and expectation, Sanité Bélair. Born into bondage, she rose to become not just a fighter, but a commander. Alongside her husband, Charles Bélair, she marched into battle against one of the most powerful armies in the world. She wore no crown, commanded no palace, yet she carried the spirit of liberty on her shoulders. Captured by the French in 1802, Sanité was sentenced to death. Authorities, clinging to old-world notions of gender, offered her a supposed mercy, execution by beheading rather than the soldiers' firing squad. But Sanité refused. If her comrades faced the gun, so would she. Standing tall before the rifles, she shouted words of defiance, urging her people never to surrender. The shots rang out, but her voice still echoes today. This is not just the story of a forgotten heroine. It is the story of a revolution that changed the world, of a woman who stood unbroken in the face of death, and of a legacy that reminds us that freedom is never handed down. It is claimed. Saint-Domingue in the late 18th century was both paradise and hell. The mountains were green, the soil rich, and the sugar plantations produced more wealth than anywhere else in the Americas. But this prosperity rested on unimaginable cruelty. Hundreds of thousands of Africans were forced to labor under the lash, their lives measured in profits and broken bodies. Death rates were so high that the colony constantly imported new captives from Africa, turning the island into a machine of exploitation. The enslaved population outnumbered the free by overwhelming numbers, yet fear and violence kept them in chains. Owners and overseers enforced control through whips, iron collars, and brutal punishments meant to crush hope. And yet, hope could not be fully destroyed. Across the cane fields, in the huts where families whispered by candlelight, dreams of freedom endured. These whispers became chants, and chants became calls to rise. In 1791, the calls erupted into revolution. What began as scattered uprisings spread into a fire that no army could contain. Men and women set fire to plantations, armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find, and declared that slavery would no longer rule their lives. The French, already shaken by their own revolution in Europe, faced the terrifying prospect of losing their richest colony to the very people they had enslaved. Amid this storm, a young woman named Sanité Bélair found her voice. She had grown up surrounded by oppression, but she refused to bow. Alongside her husband, Charles Bélair, she joined the revolutionary forces. Unlike many women who were pushed to the margins, Sanité took up arms, marched into battle, and proved her worth as a soldier. In time, she rose to the rank of lieutenant, her courage undeniable to those who fought at her side. She was not a distant figure in the background of men's stories. She was in the thick of the struggle. She learned to command troops, to rally fighters in moments when fear threatened to overtake them, and to stand firm when cannons roared. To her comrades, she was more than a symbol. She was proof that freedom's fire burned in every heart, regardless of gender. As the revolution raged, Sanité Bélair became known not just for her presence, but for her resolve. She carried herself with authority, issuing orders and standing shoulder to shoulder with male officers. In an army where survival depended on unity, her courage earned respect. The sight of a woman leading men into battle unsettled the French as much as the rebellion itself. Together with her husband Charles, she marched under the command of Toussaint Louverture, the brilliant general who forged the enslaved into an army. Louverture's leadership transformed chaos into strategy, turning plantation workers into disciplined fighters. Sanité and Charles became part of this transformation, fighting in campaigns that pushed back French forces and carved out zones of freedom on the island. But the French Empire was not ready to surrender its jewel. In 1802, Napoleon Bonaparte sent an expedition of thousands of soldiers under his brother-in-law Charles Leclerc to crush the revolution once and for all. Warships lined the harbors, cannons thundered, and Saint-Domingue became a battlefield drenched in fire and smoke. For the rebels, every victory was fleeting, every defeat catastrophic. Yet still they fought. Sanité and Charles found themselves at the heart of the struggle. They fought in the highlands, where steep terrain offered both refuge and danger. French troops burned villages to starve out rebels, but Sanité's unit struck back with ambushes, raids, and relentless resistance. Her presence gave hope to fighters who had lost homes, families, and food, reminding them that liberty was worth the sacrifice. The French campaign was ruthless. They did not hesitate to use mass executions, torture, and scorched earth tactics. Thousands died not just in combat, but from starvation and disease unleashed by the cruelty of war. Yet within this storm of death, Sanité stood unbroken. Her defiance became a quiet rallying point, proof that even when the enemy grew stronger, the human spirit could not be extinguished. As the French tightened their grip, betrayal and exhaustion crept through the rebel ranks. Ambushes became harder to sustain, food scarcer, and trust thinner. It was during this storm of desperation that Sanité and Charles were captured by French forces. The arrest sent shockwaves through the rebels, for the Bélair were not just fighters, they were symbols of the revolution's unbreakable will. Charles was executed swiftly, cut down as an example to terrify others. Sanité's fate was meant to be even harsher. The French planned to stage a brutal execution, using her death to prove that no one, man or woman, could escape imperial vengeance. In their eyes, killing her publicly would break the rebel spirit. But they underestimated the power of defiance. At her trial, she showed no fear. Witnesses later recounted how she faced her judges with dignity, speaking of liberty and justice even as her sentence was declared. She did not beg for mercy. She did not plead for her life. Instead, she embraced the role of martyr, determined that her final act would inspire rather than terrify. On the day of her execution, Sanité Bélair stood before the firing squad with her head held high. Refusing to be blindfolded, she looked directly at her executioners. Her last words were not cries of despair, but commands. She ordered them to fire. In that instant, she transformed from prisoner to commander once again, seizing control of her death in the same way she had seized control of her life. Her body fell, but her voice did not fade. Word of her courage spread quickly among rebels, carried in whispers through the forests and mountains. To the French, it was supposed to be the silencing of a rebel. To the Haitian people, it was the birth of a heroine. News of Sanité Bélair's death did not break the rebels, it strengthened them. Her defiance at the firing squad became a story repeated in camps and whispered across villages, a woman who stared death in the eye and commanded it herself. For every rebel weary from hunger or fear, her name became a spark, reminding them that freedom was worth any sacrifice. The French could kill bodies, but they could not kill belief. Her martyrdom, coupled with the persistence of Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines, kept the fire of revolution alive. Haiti's fighters drew strength from Sanité's example, and her courage reminded them that their struggle was larger than any single battle. In the years that followed, the tide turned. The French suffered heavy losses, weakened by both relentless rebellion and the spread of yellow fever. By 1804, Haiti declared independence, becoming the first free black republic in the world and the second independent nation in the Western Hemisphere. Though Sanité did not live to see the day, her sacrifice was part of the foundation upon which independence was built. Her legacy endured not only in Haiti's victory, but also in the recognition that women had stood shoulder to shoulder with men in the revolution. She became a symbol of both resistance and equality, proof that freedom was fought for by all, not granted by a few. Today, her name is remembered as a warrior who turned execution into empowerment and whose courage still echoes in the story of Haiti's birth. Though Sanité's life was cut short in 1802, her story did not die with her. In the years after independence, her memory lived on in the oral traditions of Haiti, told in songs, stories, and family lineages. Mothers whispered her courage to daughters, fathers told sons that freedom was not won by generals alone, but by ordinary men and women who refused to bend. Her name became a quiet act of defiance, a reminder that women had borne the torch of liberty as fiercely as any man. Yet, like many women revolutionaries, her role was often overshadowed by the towering figures of Toussaint Louverture, Dessalines, and Christophe. The history books written by men sometimes mentioned her only briefly or not at all. For generations, she was remembered more in spirit than in text, but silence could not erase her, just as execution could not diminish her power. In the 20th century, Haitian historians and feminist scholars began to restore her place in the revolution's story. They celebrated her not as a mere supporting figure, but as a leader in her own right, one of the first women in the modern Americas to die for the cause of anti-colonial freedom. Statues were raised, streets named in her honor, and her face appeared on Haitian currency. In classrooms, her story is now taught alongside the great generals, ensuring that future generations know she stood unflinching against empire. Globally, Sanité Bélair has become a symbol of intersectional resistance, a black woman, an enslaved person turned soldier who defied both colonialism and the gendered expectations of her time. Her final act, commanding her own executioners, has been studied, retold, and revered as one of the most powerful gestures of resistance in revolutionary history. Her spirit resonates beyond Haiti, inspiring movements for freedom and equality across the world. She reminds us that revolutions are never the work of a few, but of countless individuals whose courage reshapes history. Her death did not silence the dream of freedom. Instead, it gave it new strength. In rebel camps, fighters spoke of her courage as if she were still marching beside them. Some claimed they could hear her voice when they prepared for battle, urging them not to surrender, not to bow. Her name became a kind of shield, protecting those who carried machetes against French rifles. The French, though armed with superior weapons, could not crush a people fueled by such stories. Every execution created martyrs, and martyrs created legends. Sanité was one of the brightest of these legends, a reminder that resistance was not only a duty, but an honor. The French sought to terrify the Malagasy into submission in 1947, just as they had tried to terrify the Haitians a century earlier. But in Haiti, Sanité's death proved terror could backfire. Her sacrifice was part of the chain that led to independence in 1804, when Haiti stood victorious as the world's first free black republic. She did not live to see the French defeated, but her blood watered the same soil that bore freedom. When the tricolor flag was lowered, when the Haitian flag was raised, Sanité's spirit was present, woven into every shout of celebration. And yet, history often forgets women. While the names of men filled the chronicles, hers was reduced to a footnote. The revolution had depended on her, but official accounts buried her beneath the weight of generals and emperors. Still, in the villages, in the homes, in the voices of women who had watched her stand tall before the firing squad, Sanité lived on. They told their children that courage had a woman's face. Years passed, generations turned, and Haiti endured struggles that tested its independence. But each time the people faced hardship, figures like Sanité Bélair returned in memory. Statues and poems later restored her name, but her true monument was never stone. It was the will of a nation that refused to forget her command to face death with unflinching pride. Her story continues because it is more than history. It is a warning against silence, a promise that defiance is never wasted. She teaches us that even when power seems absolute, one voice, one act, one refusal to kneel can ripple through centuries. And in Haiti, where the soil still remembers fire and blood, Sanité Bélair remains a heroine whose final words still echo. Liberty is worth dying for. Her courage was not born in the moment of execution. It had been forged long before, in the fields where she worked, in the nights where she listened to her husband and comrades plan strategy, in the marches she made alongside barefoot soldiers with nothing but faith in freedom. She knew that one day the price might be her life, but she accepted it as the cost of dignity. For the French, her execution was a tool. They believed that by killing her publicly, they could break the resolve of the rebels, proving that women would be treated with the same ruthless hand as men. But the act had the opposite effect. In seeing her face death without fear, Haitians realized that their struggle was larger than any single body. Sanité became proof that liberty demanded sacrifice, but also that sacrifice gave birth to immortality. Even in the silence of official reports, her defiance was impossible to erase. French officers wrote of her composure with unease, some admitting that she had unnerved the very men ordered to shoot her. She was supposed to be a victim, yet she died as a commander, holding authority until her last breath. That inversion, the captive who controlled her captors, was what made her unforgettable. After independence, as Haiti struggled to define itself, her name resurfaced in whispers. Villagers recalled her as the woman who would not bend, and revolutionaries invoked her as proof that women had stood at the front lines. While kings and emperors rose and fell in Haiti's turbulent politics, Sanité remained above them, untainted by power, unbroken by compromise. The truth is that history often forgets its women, but Haiti, born in the flames of revolution, carried their memory differently. In marketplaces, women told her story as they sold goods. In fields, workers remembered her when they lifted their tools. In homes, mothers spoke of her when teaching their children what it meant to be free. In these small acts, her story refused to fade. By the 20th century, when nations across Africa and the Caribbean began their own struggles against colonial powers, her name returned as a banner of inspiration. Writers and poets compared her defiance to that of countless others who faced firing squads for freedom. Feminist movements in Haiti lifted her legacy as proof that the fight for liberty had always included women. She was not just a Haitian heroine, she was a global one. Her face appeared on Haitian currency, her name engraved on streets and memorials, her story taught to children. And yet, her true power was not in statues or paper money. It was in the lesson she gave the world, that even when condemned, even when stripped of power, one could face death with dignity, leaving behind a fire that could never be extinguished.